From today, you're the newcomer in our house, my mother-in-law declared, fixing me with a piercing look. You're at the very bottom of the hierarchy and responsible for all the household chores. Is that clear? She added, her tone unyielding. Huh? Oh, all of them? I stammered, struggling to process her words. Can't you understand simple instructions the first time? She snapped sharply. You must have a poor memory. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I murmured, my voice trembling. Desperately, I glanced at my husband for support, but he avoided my gaze. It was as if none of this concerned him. This wasn't the life he had promised me, but something awaited me ahead. Something that would change everything. My name is Aubrey. As I turned 30 a few years ago, my parents started pressuring me to get married more often. At the time, I attended a home party that I was invited to by a friend. There, I met a man and unexpectedly hit it off with him. We started dating soon after, and after a year and a half, we got married. Back then, I didn't give much thought to marriage. In retrospect, that was my downfall. I was in a hurry, driven by the sole desire to reassure my parents. My overly anxious mother would call me almost every week, worried that I would remain single for the rest of my life. So when I announced that I had decided to get married, she cried tears of joy. My husband, Hector, was an average person in both good and bad ways, and we naturally got along well. We hardly ever fought, so when he proposed, I accepted immediately. One day after our marriage was set, while we were having a meal at a restaurant, Hector brought up the following. Actually, I'm a little worried about my parents being the eldest son. I'd like to live with them if possible. Huh? You mean living together? I asked, taken aback by his sudden revelation. He nodded. Yes, I think it's important to be there for them. I was somewhat impressed that Hector, who hadn't talked much about his family until then, had been thinking about his future in-laws to that extent. Living with your spouse's family after marriage is a common thing, or so I thought. With that kind of image in mind, I casually agreed to my husband's proposal. From the day we registered our marriage, we started living in my husband's parents' house. On the day of cohabitation, I headed to my husband's family home with him. Of course, I had met his parents on the occasion of our marriage greetings and the meeting of both families, but living together was still nerve-wracking. During this time, I had been naive in my thinking. Even though we were living together, I didn't expect any dramatic hospitality like in dramas, and I thought household chores would be properly divided among everyone. I was carelessly thinking about such things. Besides, my husband's sister also lived in his parents' house, and I even thought it would be easier having someone of the same age around. However, my thinking was quickly shattered. When I arrived at my in-laws' house, I said, I'm counting on you from today. My mother-in-law looked down at me at the entrance and said, From today, you're the newcomer in our house. You're at the bottom of the hierarchy and responsible for all the household chores. Understood? Huh? Oh, all of them, I stammered, suddenly overwhelmed. Can't you comprehend what you're told in one go? She snapped, then added, You have a poor memory, don't you? What kind of education did your parents give you? Oh yes, I'm sorry, I apologized quickly. In a panic, I looked at my husband, but he casually averted his gaze. He had told me before we got married, even if we live together, my parents are still healthy, so you don't have to worry too much about household matters. This was absurd. When I went back to the room to put down my luggage, I asked my husband about it. Hey, what's going on? I was told to do all the household chores by myself. You said I didn't have to worry about household matters, right? I exclaimed indignantly. Huh? Did I say something like that? He replied, pretending to be confused. What? You definitely said that, I insisted. As the eldest son's wife, it's only natural for you to take care of the household chores, he said dismissively. We're being allowed to live here, so don't complain. To my surprise, my husband was playing dumb. He wasn't on my side. He had no intention of helping me. I realized it immediately. From that day on, my hellish cohabitation life began. From morning till night, whenever I was at home, I was constantly made to do household chores. I was fortunate enough to be working and didn't have to be at home on weekdays during the day. But on weekday mornings, evenings, and weekends, I was always at the mercy of my in-laws' demands. No matter how much I did, they would complain. "Can't you see that there's still dust left?" my mother-in-law would yell at me. One morning, I tried to take a bath early because I had to do chores, but my mother-in-law stopped me. "As a newcomer, it's common sense for you to be the last one to take a bath," she scolded. There were even days when I couldn't take a bath until past midnight. Those days were incredibly tough. Not only did my in-laws never help with the household chores, but my husband didn't either, and yet, they would all join together to complain to me. It was impossible for me to handle all the household chores in a single house perfectly, but if I said even a single word of defiance, it would be over. It would come back to me multiplied many times over. I was entrusted with all the household chores, and no matter how hard I tried, there would always be some complaint. Every day I was exhausted from lack of sleep, pushing to my limits. My sister-in-law, who I thought was my only salvation, turned out to be no different from the rest of my in-laws. "Since you've become part of the family, it's only natural for you to listen to what your sister says," she said, then casually stole my personal belongings. It became a daily occurrence. "Hey, I have a feeling that your sister is stealing my cosmetics," I told my husband one evening. "Seriously? She'd never do something like that," he replied dismissively. "And anyway, she's your sister too now, so you should try to get along with her. Honestly, she's already said you're hard to deal with, especially since you don't even contribute as much as I do." His words left me stunned, and all I could do was lower my head in silence. My husband's comments, which used to be nothing but complaints about me, turned into condescending remarks. I realized that there was no one on my side. Why did I have to endure all of this? Every day I cried myself to sleep. Why didn't I get a divorce despite everything? Some might wonder, but it's not that I didn't want to get a divorce. I couldn't get a divorce. When I thought about my parents, who were so overjoyed at my marriage, the idea of getting a divorce less than a year into my marriage was something I couldn't bear. "You have a family now. I'm relieved," my mother had said, smiling through tears. Whenever something painful happened, I would remember her face, and those words echoed in my mind. I felt like divorcing would be betraying my mother, and I simply couldn't do it. One evening during an ordinary dinner, my sister-in-law suddenly addressed everyone at the table with a serious expression. "Can I say something?" she began, her tone commanding attention. "I'm getting married," she announced plainly. "Really? You're getting married? That's wonderful," I exclaimed, genuinely surprised but happy for her. "Congratulations!" My husband and in-laws chimed in, their faces lighting up with excitement. I joined in with my own heartfelt congratulations. But instead of acknowledging me, she dismissed it with a cold remark. "I wasn't really telling you specifically." Her indifference didn't bother me in the slightest. Honestly, I was far more thrilled by the thought that one less troublesome person would soon be out of this house. From there, the conversation naturally shifted to the details of her upcoming wedding, and the atmosphere quickly turned lively as everyone eagerly joined in the discussion. The wedding went well, and after the registration, my sister-in-law would be living with her husband's family. Since my sister-in-law was no longer in the house, my in-laws appeared lonely. However, thanks to her absence, the bullying and mistreatment toward me had weakened, and I felt considerably relieved. I was careful not to let anyone notice my true feelings, as I didn't want them to sense my relief. Nevertheless, gradually, I started to regain some mental space, and a desire to break free from this situation began to emerge. How could I escape from this house without causing sadness to my parents? I pondered this question. While contemplating, I recalled something peculiar: the unusually late time my husband would return home. I had been so preoccupied with fussing over the daily chores I was commanded to do that I hadn't paid much attention. But upon closer consideration, I realized it was indeed strange. He hadn't been the type of person to have such consistent overtime before we got married. Yet recently he would arrive home just before the date changed. I vaguely remembered hearing about it once before. "Are you that busy with work?" I asked him cautiously. "Huh? It's none of your business, just shut up," he replied coldly, without even glancing away from his smartphone. I didn't probe further. Even if my husband came home late, I considered a blessing, or so I thought. I decided to investigate the reason behind his late return. On my day off from work, I informed my mother-in-law that I would go grocery shopping for dinner, but instead, I went straight to the bank to withdraw my savings and headed to a detective agency to seek their assistance. Soon enough, I was informed of the results of the investigation into my husband. The photos showed my husband with an unknown woman, proving his affair. According to the detective, my husband's mistress was a colleague at his workplace who, like him, was also married. Their relationship seemed to have started before I married him. I was played a recorded conversation from a bar they frequented. I married my wife just to have her take care of my parents as a servant. She's serving her purpose adequately, my husband's voice echoed through the recording. Really? But you married her despite everything, right? The woman asked. Are you jealous? You are the only one I love, he reassured her. I was filled with an overwhelming desire to crumple the photos that captured my husband and his mistress wearing smiles. Reminding myself that these were pieces of evidence, I managed to calm my emotions somehow. It became evident to me that my husband burdened me with responsibilities while seeking the freedom to spend time with his mistress. With this conviction, I visited the lawyer's office on my next day off and sought their assistance. During that entire week, of course, my in-laws and husband freely released their abusive remarks. Unlike before, I thought, everything will become evidence, so I recorded their verbal abuse each time. After a few days of consulting with a lawyer, an unexpected situation arose. My sister-in-law, who had married and moved into her husband's family home, came back crying. It had been a while since I last saw her, and she seemed a bit worn out, clinging to my clothes and sobbing. While I was tasked with cleaning the room, I listened to the conversation between my sister-in-law and my in-laws. Surprisingly, my sister-in-law had been subjected to blame from her husband's mother. What should I do? She asked, her voice trembling. It's impossible to expect you to be perfect at housework. Why are you complaining? Your husband understands, my father-in-law said dismissively. Exactly. Instead of complaining, you should be grateful that he even helps out, my mother-in-law added. They tried to console their daughter. It's despicable not to protect your wife. Sister, you should consider leaving such a man, my husband chimed in with an air of self-righteousness. Hearing those words, I couldn't help but think, wait, you're saying that? You're no different. And it slipped out of my mind. My father-in-law reassured her, you're doing more than enough. Just because you are a daughter-in-law doesn't mean you have to do everything. Exactly. Ideally, everyone should share the responsibilities, my mother-in-law agreed. I didn't have to do everything. Share the responsibilities? That's easy for them to say. There was a snapping sound within me, like something had just snapped. Hold on, sis. You have it better than me, right? Actually, it's your own fault, isn't it? After all the bullying you've put me through, now it's coming back to haunt you, I said, unable to suppress my feelings any longer. In an instant, my in-laws turned red with anger. Don't dare joke around. Who do you think you are, Hector's wife? My father-in-law snapped. Don't you have any empathy? My husband added. You're not even human, my mother-in-law shouted, hurling insults one after another. Despite that, my sister-in-law tried to portray herself as a tragic heroine. How awful! You don't even understand my feelings. Just stay quiet, she exclaimed. Oh, really? I understand your feelings just fine. I've been bullied by all of you for so long, I retorted. The old me wouldn't have dared to respond like this, but at the moment I couldn't stop myself. Seriously, haven't you realized? The things you've done to me all this time are the same as what your husband's family is doing to you. Yet, you all just spout empty platitudes. Aren't you ashamed? I continued firmly. My mother-in-law screamed hysterically. Well, what are you saying? You're a failure, so we need to keep you under control. Following suit, my husband stood up and declared, I never thought you were such a person. I've had enough. I want a divorce. Upon hearing that, my in-laws smirked and lauded. They must have thought I would be taken aback by the mention of divorce. Of course, divorce is fine by me, but in return, I will make sure to claim my fair share of the assets, I replied calmly. Huh? Fair share of the assets? My husband repeated, dumbfounded. In front of him, I scattered the photos of evidence of his infidelity that I had received from the detective agency. As he turned pale, my in-laws trembled in disbelief at the realization that their son had done such a thing. I turned to him and said, "Hey, you had a relationship even before marrying me, right? And the other person was married too. You were satisfied with burdening me with troublesome parents, weren't you?" My in-laws were speechless, shocked to learn their son married me to shirk caring for them. My mother-in-law muttered, "Hector, this can't be true, right?" "It's all a lie, isn't it?" Their own son had been involved in an affair. It must have been a tremendous shock. My mother-in-law's face turned ashen and she lowered her head. "Regarding the divorce, you'll receive further instructions from the lawyer I've hired. Please follow the guidance from now on," I stated firmly, then left my in-laws' house behind me, and from then on, everything went smoothly. The evidence of my husband's infidelity that I received from the detective agency, along with the recordings I had been making of my husband and in-laws' remarks, became proof. I was able to divorce my husband without any issues. Furthermore, this revelation exposed the affair to the husband of the other woman, leading to their divorce as well. Moreover, the other woman's husband demanded compensation from my husband. Both my husband and the other woman had stipulated their savings. In fact, they were in debt. I heard that my husband had to borrow money through cash advances just to pay the compensation. But that wasn't the only punishment for my husband. Since the other woman was a colleague at his workplace, the affair became known in the company, and he was looked down upon by others. As a result, unable to bear the atmosphere at work, my husband decided to resign voluntarily. On the other hand, I quietly returned to my parents' home after divorcing my husband. At first, my parents greeted me with surprised expressions, but when I explained everything, they burst into tears and hugged me. "It's our fault for making you go through such things. We're so sorry. We should have noticed. We're truly sorry," my parents said through tears. I also realized that everything had finally come to an end and felt relieved, tears streaming down my face. From then on, I spent my days together with my parents at home. My workplace was within a reasonable commuting distance from my parents' place, and I successfully submitted a transfer request, which was accepted. When I think back on my married life with my husband, there are days when I regret not taking action earlier. But now, being able to peacefully spend my days with my parents, it's all because of my own effort, and no one else. It's the fruit of my own hard work. From now on, I want to cherish each day and live a life without regrets.